The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, I have Len May. Len is CEO of Endocanna Health. Endocanna are a biotechnology research company doing some cool stuff in the area of personalisation. Welcome, Len. How are you?
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. I'm great.
Good.
Well, as good as I can be during these times, but
Yes,
I'm healthy.
Yeah.
It's a new measure of normal. You're healthy. All right.
Yeah.
COVID-free.
That's good to hear, man. Same here, I think, hopefully.
I think, yeah, right?
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. I'm actually really looking forward to this interview, sort of personalization and personalized medicine a lot as a theme. So it's great that your company is focusing quite heavily on that area. We'll get to talk about that stuff in a bit, but let's find out a bit more about you to begin with.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Lithuania, and my parents immigrated to the U.S. when I was 6. And so I grew up in Philadelphia in a very, what you would imagine like a Soviet kind of family would be like. Parents did not know anything about drugs, and very, heroin and cannabis are probably the same level for them. So that's sort of my upbringing. And I was diagnosed with ADD when I was a teen. And the kind of ADD that I had, I was a fairly good student when I wanted to be. But what happened is that all these thoughts would pop into my head. It's sort of like tabs in your browser window. You have all these different tabs, which I have like 40 open at a time because that's how my brain works. Yeah, all these thoughts would pop into my head, and I would have to kind of go and start focusing on something else. So they diagnosed me with ADD, put me on a prescription medication, or a couple of them. So I'm not saying they didn't help, but they really numbed me to any feelings. So I was always walking around in a haze. And then I started hanging out with some older kids. And one day before school, they said, "Hey, do you want to smoke a cigarette?" And I was just like, yeah, I'm smoking cigarettes. I'm going to be cool with these older kids. So we hung out with these kids, and they passed me a cigarette, and I took a puff off it, and I started coughing, and it wasn't a cigarette. It was loaded with cannabis. But the thing that I got out of that experience was I went back to class, and those windows sort of slowed down for me, and I could focus. And I discovered my new medicine, my go-to. So that became my go-to medicine. And my parents, who I just spoke about, I gave you sort of an image of the Soviet parents. Every time they would catch me, it would be a big thing. And, over years, as I got older, I got caught many, many times. And my dad told me that, basically I said, "I'm going to do this." And he said, "Okay, don't bring it in my house." So I said, "Okay, I won't bring it in your house." Long story even longer. One day I wake up, and my parents have a pouch that I used to keep my cannabis and my pipes and everything in my car. They have it sitting on their kitchen table. So it was a whole big thing. And my parents said, "Hey, what if we call the cops?" And I said, "Call the cops." So they did.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, cops came, and 2 female officers, and they basically didn't do much, just yelled at me and gave me a speech and a lecture. And they said if it was my son, I would kick him to the curb. So my dad said, "You got 5 minutes to get your stuff," and kicked me to the curb. So no place to live. I had some little bit of money in my pocket, and that's kind of how I started my cannabis journey. Became an activist. A few years later, I was, you got a Defected Records shirt on. I got a Black Sabbath. I was in the music business. So I became a music buyer for Tower Records. And so music was my thing, and cannabis was my thing. It kind of blended together. And I was invited to go to a festival called the Horde Festival, not Horde, Horde, Horde Festival, which a bunch of bands were playing, like Ziggy Marley, the Black Crowes, bands like that. And there was a group of kids that were registering people to vote, and they were called the Cannabis Action Network. So I asked them, hey, what are you guys up to? And they're like, well, we're registering people to vote for help with legalization. I said, okay, great. So what are you doing? So getting people to vote to legalize. Okay. So anyway, I became the president of the Cannabis Action Network. I became an activist because I thought that we could do a lot more. And I held a rally at Independence Hall in Philadelphia where the Constitution and Declaration of Independence are, all written on hemp paper, by the way. And I realized my first aha moment where cannabis is a medicine. My keynote speaker was this lady, her name is Elvie Musica, and she's one of the first people to get federally prescribed cannabis by the government. And she had her tin of pre-rolled joints, as they call them, pre-rolled cigarettes, with a USDA label on it. She lit one up in front of federal rangers, and nothing happened. I was like, wow, that's the future. It's going to happen. And that was back in 1993. So it took a long time for legalization to kind of set foothold. But that's basically my background. And I did work in corporate. I used to work for a company called Price Waterhouse for a while. And then I went to work for a venture capital company, did some commercial real estate. But cannabis was always my calling. And through commercial real estate, when I moved to Los Angeles, I got into the dispensary space. So I was an owner and operator of 5 dispensaries under the same brand. And the federal government ended up shutting us down for no real reason because we're operating within compliance, but because they could. And that kind of started my journey. So I'll kind of pause and see if you have any other questions, because I can dive deeper into sort of how I went from the dispensary space to doing more of the genomics stuff.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that was a brilliant summary. And just for those that aren't familiar with it, ADD is attention deficit disorder, right?
Yeah, correct.
But yeah, wow, that sounds like quite a tumultuous time and journey. But yeah, maybe tell us a bit more about Endocanna and how you made that jump from, the activism bit to starting that business.
Yeah, well, so when we had our dispensaries, there was certain things I started to notice. We would give the same exact cultivar, or you would call it strain, to 2 different people with the same symptomatic conditions. And sometimes they would have a completely different response. So like having ADD, you're either all over the place or you're hyper-focused on something that stimulates dopamine. And I became obsessed. I really thought that it had to do with the plant. So I started, when the dispensaries got shut down, I started doing research, and I found a video by a guy named Kevin McKernan, who was one of the first people to genetically sequence cannabis. I reached out to Kevin or his people. They said he's going to be in San Francisco. He's got 30 minutes. Anyway, I flew to San Francisco from LA, ended up spending hours with Kevin, started working with their company called Medicinal Genomics, and my job was to go around the US and Canada and collect samples of cannabis, bring it back to my lab, extract the DNA, purify the DNA, and send it to a sequencer. So we started the first cultivar library called Cannapedia. So you could see an example of that would be, so strain names. Think about like Blue Dream. So I would get 5 different Blue Dreams or Sour Diesels or whatever you want to call them. And in a sequencer, you can see that 2 of them are exactly identical to Blue Dream. 2 other ones are cousins. They have a genetic footprint that's very similar. The 5th one is not even close, and they're still being called Blue Dream. So that was my obsession. But in doing so, we had a meeting in Harvard Medical School with a bunch of physicians that were treating kids with epilepsy using CBD for the most part. And they were having great results with cannabis, which full spectrum cannabis for epilepsy. But some of them were coming back and saying, well, the seizures are coming back, or it's not working as well. So what we did was we had a pharmacogenomics company arm, and which is doing genetic sequencing for specific disease states. When we did that, we looked at their genetic markers, and we saw that they had a similar genetic profile, not only epilepsy, but it was a form of epilepsy, which is called Dravet syndrome. And we ended up publishing on that. And, GW Pharmaceuticals went through FDA approval for Epidiolex, but Epidiolex specific to that predisposition or that expression of epilepsy. So I had another aha moment. I thought, well, wait, if there is a marker, some markers in common, genetic markers, maybe there's others. So I approached them. They said they're shutting down the human side. They want to focus on the plant. So I took a scientist from that company, build a scientific team, and then we ended up doing research and launching Endo in 2017. The first 6-7 months, all we did was research. We looked at every SNP, which is single nucleotide polymorphism, which is basically a gene. We looked at every single one of them that has a direct or indirect association with your endocannabinoid system. Once we have our library, then we started working with a company called Illumina to create a chip. So a chip has all the different SNPs that we look at, and we can sequence those specific markers. And the way to get the DNA is we developed a kit. Kit is just a kit with a big Q-tip, a buccal swab. You swab the inside of your mouth, you put it back in the box, and you ship it to our lab. We'll do the genetic sequence, and then we'll come back and give you a report in a fully anonymized, secure, personalized portal. They'll show you your genetic predispositions to your cannabis experience. And I can dive in a little bit deeper into that too.
Yeah.
I just don't want to get too sciencey.
Yeah. No, that's great. And wow, that's great that you kind of had a passion and several aha moments and you kind of followed that. So what it sounds like a bit like the sort of DNA test on the market for ancestry, etc. Is it that model, but obviously you're looking for something different in relation to cannabis, right?
Yeah, correct. We can still use 23andMe and Ancestry raw data. So if somebody has taken that, you can upload that to our portal and we'll provide you a report. But basically, so somebody asked me yesterday, I said, I don't understand. What can DNA tell you about cannabis? What kind of response can somebody have? I said, well, first of all, it can guide you to avoid an adverse experience. So an adverse event. And somebody was like, are there really such a thing with cannabis? What would be an example of an adverse event? So, okay, well, an example could be somebody would have anxiety or stress or paranoia. How about, consuming an edible? And some people may have an adverse experience after consuming an edible. And some people can get a little bit more depressed when consuming certain types of cannabis. So there's a whole bunch of different adverse events that are possible, and also drug interaction. If you're taking prescription medication, certain cannabinoids can be an inhibitor of that prescription medication. What type of metabolizer you are, how do you metabolize cannabinoids? That can also guide your experience. So cannabis is really truly a personal experience, and it's not about the strain names. It's about the amount of cannabinoids that you have, and also the terpene profile, which is the essential oil of the plant. Together, they can create an experience. So you have over, somewhere around 500 different components in this plant. And you also have all these genes and all these biomarkers in your body. So to be able to create an experience that's specific for you, the first thing that we look at is, what do you want to avoid? What do you not want to consume so you don't have a negative experience? So the report will show you your genetic predispositions. It'll give you a suggestion on either how to mitigate your genetic predispositions so it doesn't show up. Think about your genetic predispositions as your roadmap or your GPS. So this way, it's sort of your ways of cannabis. It'll show you this road over here has an accident or congestion or traffic. This road over here is a much better way to travel. It doesn't guarantee there's not going to be a pothole along the way. So if you have this guide, you can have a much more personalized experience with cannabis. And then once we give you that predisposition, we then look at certificate of analysis or test results from different companies or products, and we can give you what percentage of match that specific product has to your genetic profile. That's how it works.
Fantastic. Wow, there's a lot there, isn't there? I mean, how much data do you need to collect really, and where are we in that data collection journey in order to be able to sort of verify the recommendations that you're making?
Yeah, so data is an ongoing thing. Every single report that we have for every single gene, it has to have a peer-reviewed reference. Peer-reviewed references are found in the NCBI database or PubMed or university publications, etc. So we build one of our patents is an AI engine that looks for different studies that are associated with cannabis or any genetic predisposition. We pull those in through AI, and then we have a scientific board that actually reviews those studies. So everything has to have a peer-reviewed study. As new studies come up, we update our reports. You have lifetime updates as new studies come up. The third thing that we add is our own observational research. So when you first join EndoDNA or Endocanna Health, you take the EndoDNA test, you would then take a survey. And the survey gives us a baseline. And we come back to you over time and ask you how you're doing with your selected product. We pull that information in and we can make better suggestions for people. The more people use our test, the better suggestions we can make. So we combine the research that's already done, the research that we're participating in clinical studies, et cetera, and also the anecdotal research from our user base.
Wow. Loads there. I'm really keen to try this out, actually. So, I mean, so firstly, and what's your sort of revenue model for your business?
Yeah, so we make money three different ways. The first is our kit. So we sell our kit direct to consumer, or we have a B2B version, which we can co-brand and support our partners. The actual kit retails at $199 US. The raw data upload, so if you've taken your 23andMe, Ancestry, MyHeritage, any of those, that's $49.95 US. By the way, that takes less than 30 seconds to get your results. When you mail it to a lab, it can take up to 4 weeks to get your results. And then the third revenue model is formulations. So I've been formulating for the last 14 years. Also, as we gather data from what's working, we created proprietary blends that are patent pending. We make those blends in Israel. They have a specific terpene profile and an essential oil blend, and then you would add your active ingredient like your THC or CBD ratio according to our recipe, and we sell those formulations to companies around the world. So that's our revenue model.
And are you just focused on THC and CBD, or are you starting to introduce some of the quote-unquote minor cannabinoids like CBG and CBN and stuff?
Yeah, we prefer to use a full spectrum base. However, because everything has to have a peer-reviewed reference, and there's not enough peer-reviewed studies on CBG, CBDV, THCV, all the minor cannabinoids, we are not including those in our reports. As new studies come up, we'll update those and include the minor cannabinoids as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And then finally, how has COVID treated you as a business? Have you found it has increased interest, or if it's been challenges?
Well, the first, I would say, 3 weeks of COVID, it's like we got punched in the face. Nothing happened. Everything was dead. Everything stopped. No orders coming in, nothing. So we were like, what is going on? And obviously everybody was in shock. So that was an interesting time. So instead of sort of leaning back and saying, okay, we understand cannabis is essential. So eventually people get cannabis, and if they're sitting at home, we don't know how long this is going to be. They'll eventually maybe want to know what's right for them. This gives us an opportunity. So how do we boost that? How do we get people to see us again, that not only is cannabis essential, but finding what's personal for you is essential? So what we decided to do was give back. And it's always sort of a model of our company. What can we do to make a contribution? So we came up with a immune susceptibility test. It has nothing to do with cannabis per se, but it kind of does, and I'll explain why. So what we did was we gave this out for free to anybody that's taken a 23andMe, Ancestry, or any one of our tests. We would look to see what your immunosusceptibility genetic markers are. So if you have an immunosusceptibility towards influenza or, some sort of allergic rhinitis, anything of that nature, it's free. We put it up on social media everywhere so people can see if they had a predisposition. It's something that they should be aware of during COVID, that they can then strengthen and work on their immune system because they have a susceptibility. And once we started giving that out for free and giving people a way to empower themselves with that information, I think people started seeing us again in that light as an opportunity. They were curious. Okay, now we have that. Let's see what we can do to find the right cannabis for us. So it definitely, our business started increasing after that. The first month, like 3 weeks to a month, we were sort of sitting there and figuring it out. But I think we're back to being, stable and in growth mode again.
Good to hear. Well, I mean, the topic of health is going to be obviously at the forefront of most people's minds nowadays, but that's a great summary of your business. And maybe we can go on to now just sort of talk about more specifically the topic of personalized medicine. So I think you've kind of explained a bit about what that is, and effectively it's sort of tailoring what you give someone to their individual body rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. So totally non-cannabis related. What is the general state of personalized medicine in the non-cannabis world?
So there's two schools of thought. The big pharma doesn't like personalized medicine because it's a one size fits all. Your acetaminophen or your Advil is here it is. Take this, and it doesn't matter how tall, how big, how much you weigh, what other medication you take that. So big pharma is not in favor of that. However, there's a whole school of integrative medicine that looks at personalization as pharmacogenomics first. So I'm a big believer in that school. You should absolutely know what your genetic predisposition is before you consume anything. And by the way, we're expanding in addition to cannabis to nutrition. So we look at supplements, we look at nutrients. And the reason why is because all those things are modulated by your endocannabinoid system. So as your immune system, your digestive system, all the different systems of your body have this puppet master, your endocannabinoid system. And if you understand how to regulate all those things, you can modulate all those systems with that information. So understanding your nutritional predispositions, your supplements, how they interact with cannabinoids, your skin, that's the next report we're doing. What are your predispositions of skin? Maybe some topicals work better for some people than not. Also, maybe you have predispositions to things like rosacea or eczema, things of that nature. So these are all in your genes. How do you not turn that gene on? Or if it's already on, what do you do to turn that down? In addition to that, it's metabolism and other systems. So, my prediction is that pharmacogenomics or testing of your genetics will be the future of medicine. Everybody will have that. And then you can look at your epigenetic, which is the next phase of that, which is the expression of those genes. So think about it this way. I'll try to explain it in a really simple way so people can understand. Your DNA shows you your predisposition. So certain DNA you inherit from your parents, or you inherit all your genetic predispositions from your parents. Certain DNA is nothing you can do to change it. So your eye color, your hair color, that's already pre-coded in a code of a C, a T, an A, and a G. That's the way DNA communicates. Like computers communicate in ones and zeros, a binary code of your DNA communicates in those 4 letters. The combination of those letters make you who you are. But certain genes can be controlled by lifestyle. So certain genes, like your nutrition, like if you have predisposition to an allergic response to food or dairy or something, or lactose, for instance, based on your lifestyle, you can turn that gene on or off. But without knowing that you have this predisposition, there's nothing you can do. People just come in, oh, I'm lactose intolerant, and they've been consuming dairy that actually triggered the genetic response. So that trigger of the genetic response is the epigenetic response. So because you have a predisposition, when that gene is expressed itself, that's called the epigenetic response. And you can measure that. So in an ideal world, you have your endoDNA test, you took your DNA test, you did your survey, you have your product. We come back 3-6 months again, we swab you again, and we can show you on the cellular level what is happening. So is it really working for you? Now you can measure that it's really working for you. And that's sort of what we feel the future of all medicine is going to be.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that sounds super exciting. But as you say, I mean, there are so many combinations of those 4 letters and the different types of cannabinoids that you can introduce to the system to kind of balance it up. So there's a lot to play for, I guess, right?
There's a lot of different combinations, but there really isn't, because most people fit into certain categories of genetic predispositions. So as we get more data, and the data that we gather, and I really want to make this clear to your audience as well, we don't care about your personal information. We care about data. So all the personal information is anonymized. If you do not register your kit, we'll never be able to match your DNA to your personal information, nor do we care. We care that thousands of people have actually taken this test and have a certain genetic predisposition. That way, our data can be honed into that specific genotype. So what right now we have 7 different buckets, and I hate to use the word buckets, but I don't know another analogy how to explain that. But it's genetic buckets. So people with these genetic predispositions fit into these 7 buckets. So it's people that are prone to anxiety or stress with cannabis, with certain cannabinoids. That's one bucket. There's a certain bucket where people are prone to more of a depressive state. They fit into another bucket. So an example of that would be if you have a predisposition, there's a gene called FAAH, F-A-A-H. It produces an enzyme that actually breaks down THC. So think about it this way. If somebody's in a stressful event, they got cut off in traffic or they're running late somewhere, all this stress is going in through their body. They're pumping out dopamine, norepinephrine, cortisol is going in their body. Now your body realizes, your central nervous system, there's no lion chasing in the jungle. It's time to calm down. So your body releases an endogenous endocannabinoid called anandamide. Most people know what that is. In Sanskrit, the word anand means bliss. So this is your bliss hormone. And to make an analogy even associated with cannabis, THC mimics the way anandamide works within your body. So that's why you get the euphoric high. That's why you get the munchies, all those other things, because of THC binding to that CB1 receptor. So because FAAH produced that enzyme that breaks down THC, a person that produces more FAAH has less anandamide. So if you're prone to stress over time, a little bit of THC can help to mimic the anandamide that you're deficient in. So you can get that balance. However, a little bit too much THC actually triggers the fight or flight in those individuals. So as individuals say, I used to, back in the 70s, I used to smoke my Acapulco Gold and it was no problem. And then they start, they did a dab hit or they did a concentrate and their receptors are flooded and that gene turned itself on. So now they're having a panic attack. What happened? I used to smoke weed all the time, no problems. But now you have a different experience. So understanding how to navigate through those things is really, really important. And the flip side of that is a depressive state, right? So on the depressive side, I had a friend of mine who was going through a really bad divorce. And he's called me up. He's like, hey, man, I can't get out of bed. I'm really depressed. I've been smoking weed all the time. And you told me that it's supposed to help. I can't get out of bed. Maybe it's making me worse. So I'm like, okay, well, what are you consuming? He's like, I don't know, weed. I'm like, well, that's the first thing. You should really know what you're putting in your body. Let me see what the package looks like. And it was a very indica dominant hybrid cultivar. So if you think about it, indicas are dominant in a terpene profile called myrcene. And I'll explain to your audience how there's an easy way to test, trust your nose. So I'll explain that in a second. But myrcene is associated with an indica dominant cultivar, a strain. And what that does, it's more sedative. So as he's consuming a sedative type of profile of those terpene and cannabinoids, it's actually triggering his depressive or mood genetic predisposition. So that marker, so now he's getting more depressed as he's consuming the cannabis that's supposed to help him. So as he changed his profile to more of a sativa dominant that had limonene and pinene and gave him that boost of serotonin, he started feeling better. But so the nose knows, just for your audience to kind of get a really quick sample, the indica dominant hybrids originated in Southeast Asia. And if you look at, and the terpenes or the essential oil that plant produces were really a defense mechanism for that region. So like the predators that were native to that region wouldn't consume that plant, wouldn't attack it. So in that Southeast Asian region, they were prevalent in like these indica plants. And if you smell them, that's why you trust your nose. They smell skunky or diesely. And if you have that kind of profile, that's usually down. That's usually a sedative type of profile. The other sativa dominant strains or cultivars originated in a more tropical type of climate, like the Durban poison, or the Maui's from the Hawaii, Caribbean strains. They grew a little bit different and they had a different smell. They smell a little fruitier. So those are more the sativa dominant. They give you a little bit of a boost up. So even if you don't know, now that you know your profile, and some people don't test for terpenes, if you're able to smell and understand what that means, that one is more of an up, one is more of a down, and you can kind of gauge where you stand based on your genetic profile.
Wow, loads there. that's cool. I mean, I don't really know where to start there. I mean, one of the things that was playing on my mind, and something that you mentioned earlier, was around the conventional pharmaceutical model, and that is essentially isolated compounds made to a very consistent level and then mass produced, and that's the kind of pharmaceutical model, and one that's well established and lucrative for those guys. How do we make this solution cost effective? And as a business, how can you scale in this, not necessarily in the same way that a pharmaceutical company can, but how can you, grow as a business if everything is individualized?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the pharmaceutical model is about individual compounds. So if you look to see what Epidiolex is doing with, or GW Pharma with Epidiolex or Sativex, it's an individual compound. I was asked to do a study on autism using CBDV. Going through the process, it's an individual component that you had to get through a pharmaceutical company. So that's sort of their model, looking at individual components. The issue with cannabis is there's somewhere around 500 different components in the actual plant. And when you grow a plant, it's a plant. Every single plant is different. So the further you are away from the seed source, the more genetic drift that you have. So in order for you to get a plant, it's the consistency of that is always going to be different. So the way to be able to scale this is to be able to take the plant apart and then put it back together exactly the way it should be, in a tincture, in a sublingual, in something that you can get anywhere in the world that'll be the same. So think about it this way. For you, let's say your formulation that works best for you during the day is formulation number 2, whatever that's called. And then you have your nighttime formulation, which is your formulation number 5. No matter where you go, you get your tincture of formulation number 2 and your formulation number 5. And that's a scalable model that can scale anywhere in the world because the ingredients are exactly the same every single time. And we believe that's the future. The future is being able to look at your genetic profile to understand that you have a number 2, that's your formulation that works best for you. And you can go into any store, dispensary, or however it's going to be sold, and then you can get that number 2. That number 2 is not an isolated molecule. It is a combination of those cannabinoids and terpenes that are right for you. So you're always getting that same consistent formulation every single time. It's sort of like think of it as a nutraceutical model, right? When you go into your vitamin shop or somewhere else, you're going to get your vitamins or you're going to get your blend of nutrients, and it's always going to be the same because there's a regulated body that is going to test for those, and they know that those components are the same every single time. So that's kind of a way to scale.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to those 7 buckets that you were talking about before. If people do sort of largely fit into these areas, it does make it a bit more predictable in your ability to sort of provide for each of those 7 cases, let's say. Cool. Well, so just as we come to the end of the interview, where do you see this evolving? What's the sort of the future-facing, crystal ball gazing insight?
Well, the future of our business, I can tell you where we're going. So the future of our business is products to be really honed in to those specific type of products that I mentioned, the epigenetic test, and including more testing. So our goal is to do a full genome sequence. So look at every single gene in your body and give you a predisposition to everything and see how a cannabinoid therapeutic can actually align with that. So all kinds of different, like I said, skin, nutrition, all those different things. Then the other thing is doing the epigenetic test to be able to see how that's working at a cellular level, participating in more clinical research. We're doing 2 clinical trials now and 3 observational studies under institutional review boards, because we believe that the way to get rid of the ridiculous stigma associated with this plant is through science. It's being able to do that. And in an ideal world, it's being able to know what is the right cannabinoid profile for me, and then having that cannabinoid profile maybe even delivered to your home at a push of a button. Imagine this. Imagine you ordering your formulation through, hey, Alexa, get me my formulation as I'm done my EndoDNA test. And then Alexa says, hey, you're low. we're going to reorder that, and it comes to your home all the time. So your personalized formulations get delivered to your home in different type of formats. You want a strip, you want a tincture, you want a patch, whatever that is, but it's all personalized because we believe everything is personalized. And that's kind of the future of the industry, we believe.
Yeah, I look forward to that. I do think this is definitely the way forward because I think so many people have vastly different effects from the same thing. And then sometimes that can really put you off because you just think it doesn't work for me, but actually it just needs to be tailored to your needs, let's say, and your body.
The thing you mentioned, people say it doesn't work. That's one thing. But the worst thing that I see happening is somebody had a bad experience. And I've heard this so many times. Oh, no, I can't touch cannabis. What do you mean? Well, I ate a brownie one time and man, I flipped out. Well, if you knew that you were a poor metabolizer through your digestive system, if you would consume that sublingually or even, a vaporizer or smoked a joint, you would have had a completely different experience. So not knowing, and there's a purpose for this, obviously, the prohibition, all that stuff, it didn't allow for all this research. But as we're learning more and we see that you can have a positive experience, when somebody has a negative experience, they're going to tell everybody, don't touch devil's lettuce. It's the worst. It's going to make you this, this, and this. However, if somebody has a positive experience, they can do the same and change people's minds, especially. One last story, I promise. So I had somebody that I was working with had breast cancer. They've never ever touched cannabis in their life. They were super, super scared, and grew up believing that this is the worst, and your brain on drugs, and all that other propaganda. Fine, and their husband was in recovery for 27 years, also sober. So finally, they decided to see if they can get some help from chemo, from not necessarily to help treat cancer, which we make no claims, but everybody can go and look at studies where cannabis has been effective. But it's been effective to help to relieve the side effects of chemo. So this person was consuming a formulation that we developed for them, and they had no side effects of chemo. And what they did was when they were getting chemo, like it's in a room with a bunch of other people who are getting chemo at the same time, they started walking around and giving my business card to all the other people saying, hey, you got to call this guy. You got to try this stuff now because it'll make you feel better. So that's a way to change minds, one mind at a time. And if you do right by one person, the word spreads. So we don't do a really good job marketing ourselves. We don't do a really good job advertising. But what we do is when we help people, they spread the word for us. So that's
well, yeah. Word of mouth marketing is the best, as they say. Well, that's brilliant. Yeah, and I totally agree. It's people having bad experiences really is not helpful to this. But it's a bit like if someone's puked on too much tequila once, does that stop them from drinking again? I don't think so. So that's my final point on the matter.
It stopped me for 10 years. I had a really bad experience in Acapulco when I was a kid. So 10 years, I couldn't even smell it.
Well, I shouldn't laugh, but yeah, they will.
You can laugh.
Cool.
I was in a tequila drinking contest, so I came in second, but I lost really badly.
Yeah. No one's a winner in that competition, I don't think. Cool, Len. Well, thank you for joining me today. Really super interesting, and I'm really interested to get involved. So I'll drop you a line separately. But it would be great to see how you guys develop over time, and so I'd love to have you back on the show at some point to get an update.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate your time. And what we can do for your audience, we can share a code with your audience so everybody can try it. We'll put a code and you can share that with people. And I'd love to do yours. And maybe next time we can go over your results if you're comfortable going over with your audience.
Let's do that, man. Cool. All right, Len. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Cheers.